Teaching to test. Hannah Fraser.
Thank you. I don't think it can be justified. I think it's unjustifiable. I have noticed my own children's experience is becoming more narrow, and they're less interested in school than they were a year ago because they're being taught in a different way. The teachers recognise that, it's a tragedy. They don't want to do this, but they're finding themselves with very little choice with this sort of tick box type curriculum. The other thing that deeply worries me is the SATs are now set up to be marked by computers. How can we have an education system whereby computers are deciding how intelligent our children are? It's utterly ridiculous. And you're having a test that's designed to take all the ingenuity, all the ability to show creativity and flair, all of that's been taken out of the test because the computers can't deal with it. The one school that I've been speaking to about this said that last year they submitted more appeals to the testing system than ever before, and nationally there were more appeals to the testing system than ever before, and fewer were actually upheld, which just points to an education department that's simply not listening and really trying to automate the whole system. This is just unspeakably wrong. Our children deserve much, much better than this.
Daniel, is the balance wrong? Teaching to test?
Well, I've heard a lot of very mixed messages about SATs, both from head teachers, local parents, and other organisations here in the constituency. I go back to my earlier point, which is that the 5 Shropshire MPs shouldn't work in silos, because a lot of these issues affect all of us across the whole of Shropshire. And we have built up, I would like to say to you, a very strong, mutually respectful relationship with many bodies like the Hospital Trust, the Police, Ambulance Service and other organisations. We don't have that relationship with your trade union. And I think that it's very, very important that you do come, and I offer you this genuine invitation that if I'm re-elected, to work constructively with you and to meet with you on a quarterly basis at our team meetings so that we can hear directly some of your concerns as people on the coalface facing some of the pressures that you do in doing this very important job that you do. And that's a genuine offer I want to put forward.
What's the answer to the question?
I will ask it again then. Do you feel the balance is wrong or not?
I personally feel the balance is right, but I'm willing to listen to people like you if you have an alternative perspective. And by the way, may I just say this, lastly, look, if we are to believe the opinion polls and all the media pundits, there is likely to be, although it's not guaranteed, but we're likely to have another Conservative government after the next election. Now, do you want to, well, you had your say, there's likely to be a Conservative government. Now, do you as a union, and the people who are at the coalface of providing this vital service for our children, do you want to engage with the local Conservative MPs and together work together to lobby government on schools and issues like the SATs, or do you want to use opportunities like this just to vent your frustration?
That's right. The idea that you have a really cordial relationship with other professional bodies is that I know for a fact you and the BMA aren't exactly getting on like a house on fire. Secondly, I think this is important to recognise that outcomes in schools are not necessarily numerical. And, you can have qualitative assessment of the attainment of children without sitting them down and making them do tests left, right and centre, which I think puts a huge amount of pressure on teachers, but also a huge amount of pressure on children. And it's known that children are less happy now than they used to be. The purpose, in my opinion, of primary school education is to produce well-rounded, happy children that are capable and ready to progress into secondary school.
I've got a year six student on suicide watch at the moment. I run a jigsaw family group and I support 350 families within the county that have got a range of neurological conditions. I'm having to look at setting up my own school because there is nothing in Shropshire Telford and Wrekin have 5 ASD specific schools, and Shrewsbury has nothing. The only hub, which is in Ellesmere, the Lakelands school, has a hub called Academia. They spent a fortune trying to open this place up, and it's not even working. When I spoke to the head of Children's Services about the fact that we've got one of our girls who's accessing education for 1 hour a day, and her mum has to sit with her, it's at the Lakelands hub. Our children are really suffering. As I said, I've got a year 6 student who is on suicide watch. I've got a year 9 student coming to me tonight in crisis. There is no crisis support in this county. Our children are so stressed. These are neurological children that are not typical. These are children with autism, ADHD, and PDA. We've got other children that are neurotypical that aren't coping with it either. They're getting really stressed coming home, displaying massive symptoms of stress and not being able to cope. So yes, I'm having to look at setting up my own school to make sure it's part vocational. I have 15-year-old twins, one in mainstream school and the other one is in Lancashire. It's a 6-hour round trip for me.
That'd be a free school that you're looking to set up?
Yes, and it's going to be part vocational and part class-based.
Yeah.
Our children are really suffering. Shropshire is the largest landlocked county. We have one of the most amount of children on the spectrum, yet the least amount of support until I came along. I don't get paid for what I do. I don't want to see a parent having to witness their 11-year-old son, as mine, to be dragged off the Shrewsbury police station and handcuffed and sat in there for 4.5 hours because there was no crisis care and it was put there through education.
Okay.
So we need you all, whoever gets in, to pull your finger out and help our families. I know
There's a first-hand account of how much pressure is being piled onto our young people, our children. They're not even our young people. In terms of assessment at primary school, there is absolutely no reason why a process of continuous assessment can't be carried out. And that's a good way of ensuring that kids get the help they need earlier if they're starting to fall behind, rather than only realising they're falling behind when they don't get the right level in their SATs. That said, I don't want somebody's GCSEs to be the first time they've ever sat down and taken an exam, because clearly sitting down and taking an exam is an important life skill that you're going to have to do over and over again. So SATs in secondary school, I think, are a very different issue to SATs in primary school. The performance of primary schools can also be evaluated in a different way. Dare I say the word Ofsted? While that is a system that needs a huge amount of reform, a kind of overseeing body to assess the quality of teaching and learning in that school is much, much better than a battery of tests and exams over and over again, which all it does is narrow the curriculum and mean that things like the arts subjects and creativity are squeezed out. I would much rather my child knows how to tell a story than they know the exact words of where to put a comma in the right place.
Okay. Hannah, one thing to add?
Yes, thank you. I'm really hoping that one of you tonight is going to ask us a question.
In terms of that.
Well, our policy is to try and support them as much as possible and arrange the education system accordingly. Undoubtedly, in primary education, putting them under pressure for exams does not help. So one of the reasons we would do away with most of the exams in primary education is to make children happier in going to school. But yes, obviously, you need to try and support as many different needs as possible.
Okay, Daniel?
Well, I'll go back to the earlier point about the funding mechanism, because of course it is astounding, it's astonishing that we get about £4,200 per annum for every syllable.
Sorry, to answer my question, why is your government discriminating children dyslexia? Nothing to do with funding. It was an interim policy you put in that says they have to be able to spell in order to meet the expected standard. Now, you telling me you're just going to come out with, you haven't actually answered the direct question once yet. So,
okay,
can you just answer that question? Why is your government discriminating? It's not difficult.
Well,
in terms of dyslexia in the test.
I can't answer that question here and now, but I'd be very happy to find out your circumstances at the end of this meeting. And
it's your government's interim framework. You should know about it. It basically says, and I appreciate we can have a conversation about it. But under the Equality Act 2010, it says that dyslexia falls under the protected characteristic of disability. Now, when we talk about pressures putting on children and their mental health, you're taking a group of children that all find it incredibly difficult to meet any standard. We as parents, and I am a parent of 2 dyslexic twin boys who took their SATs last week. You know, I spend all my time building their self-esteem, telling them they can do whatever they want to do if they work really hard, and spend all that time, the schools invest so much time in the children being able to do exactly what I'm doing, for them to get to year 6, having spent those years working really hard to not be able to meet that standard. I think it's an absolute disgrace, and I would be really interested to know how you got that through equality.
Thank you. You'll look at in more detail in terms of the specifics of dyslexia, the funding mechanism.
Well, but the funding mechanism does dovetail into this.
It doesn't, because it costs nothing to take that out, does it? It costs nothing to take it out. Your government should give us an interim framework to be there for the 2nd year.
Yes.
Okay, Emma, just quickly on
where have we got to?
Special educational needs and children with mental health and disorders.
I'd just like to mention something that you may not know about, which is that Caroline Lucas, the Green MP, brought in a private member's bill in Parliament to make PSHE compulsory and to include sex and relationships education. And the good news is that it had really widespread support, because that's the sort of thing that gets squeezed out of the curriculum in favour of the compulsory elements and the testable elements. But it's actually incredibly important in addressing future issues like consent in relationships, domestic violence, equality, and relationship education, and dealing with bullying on social media and so on. So I would urge you to kind of keep an eye out for it, because unfortunately it was about to have its second reading last week, so it was one of the things that got lost with the general election being called, but hopefully it can come back.
An issue that's plagued Shropshire for a long time now. Personally, I find myself not in alignment with Schools Forum on this. Schools Forum for a long time have had an ethos whereby the pounds are better spent in larger schools, and that the council should make some tough decisions and close some of the smaller schools that are seen as not as efficient, I suppose, in terms of money. I think from an educational point of view that may be true, but from a point of view in terms of sustaining communities, it's an absolute disaster, because with the small villages you take away the school and pretty soon you're not going to get any families moving into the community, and you're left with a sort of shell of a community that with time ages, but there's nobody living there who can do the sort of work that the older people need to support them, and the whole kind of community begins to break down. So I think we should face up to the fact that it costs more money to educate children in small rural schools, and we should say that we are willing to pay that money. I think that it's a nonsense to say that, I'm sorry, but it's too expensive to educate children if they live in a rural community, so we're not going to do it. I think we should bite the bullet and say we want thriving communities, we want thriving rural communities, we need to fund it properly.
Laura.
I grew up in a village, and as Hannah said, the school was very much at the heart of the community. I'm still friends with people that I went to primary school with now. Neighbours' central policy on education is to form a national education service, so not dissimilar in structure to the National Health Service, where all educational facilities are free at the point of need. So mental health services, children and young people's sexual health services, all of those things can be brought under the umbrella of the National Education Service, which will limit that fragmentation of services and hopefully try and prevent that kind of discrepancy in services between areas. Also, it'll have proper democratic accountability, and it means that smaller schools will be maintained. I mean, certainly in my village school, because it's a good school, people are coming out of the town and wanting to attend that school.
Our school was in the top 3% for progress in the results you worry about the future of your school, and it's ridiculous when the school is better than it's ever been. We're so proud of it that suddenly we're kind of thinking long term, is it still going to be there?
There is a bigger issue in terms of proper long-term thinking about what we want our communities in Shrewsbury and Shropshire to be like, because we have to think broader in terms of what economic development are we going to try and engage with in Shropshire if we want our communities to thrive. So you can't really think about schools in isolation in this one. We need to think more broadly about, do we want to just be a retirement county, or do we want to be somewhere where there's sort of vibrant opportunities for people to live and work as well?
Okay, Emma.
Yes, I mean, I'd agree with that. It is in the longer term, it is about thinking about rural communities and how they work, and bringing back more employment to rural areas, and maybe even kind of looking at how we do farming and actually making the countryside more viable. I mean, every village you go through, every other house is the old post office, the old smithy, the old vicarage, some of them the old school, and it's a change that actually we need to think about what kind of society we are building. Having said that, our education policy is that formal education wouldn't actually start till age 7, and that there would be free universal early years education before that, so that could potentially bring in more younger children to schools, and so that would make the existing schools more viable in the shorter term.
Daniel.
The very first thing I did was to meet a delegation with very angry parents that Grafton School was being closed, and they were determined to prevent that from happening. Of course, now many of them are actually very pleased with Bicton School, and their children go to Bicton School, and I've asked them whether they would change things, and they said no, we're very happy in Bicton School. So many people don't want change, don't like change, but sometimes the reality of the new situation is actually better for them. I'm in discussions with the community near Westbury, where Hope and Wortham there are changes taking place, and in discussions with the parish council there is a lot of support actually for that school closure, because they can see a more sustainable footing going forward. So it's to do with sustainability and value for money for the taxpayer.
And Edward Higginbottom, rural schools.
Our policy is to try and maintain as much infrastructure in the rural areas as possible, and that includes village schools. We want to see these maintained as long as is possible. We think that having young children in particular having to travel long distances to go to school is stressful and therefore bad for them, and we want them to enjoy their education. However, there is always the caveat that at some stage, if a rural school gets too small, you may well have to make a decision as to what is best for the community as a whole, not just a particular village. So we would try and maintain rural schools as long as possible, but bearing in mind that there are budget cuts, they are probably not going to disappear. One has to ask whether maintaining a small school with half a dozen pupils would be viable when they could be better utilised, the teachers could be better utilised, teaching more children if their schools were amalgamated.
Teaching assistants, Edward Higginbottom.
Well, firstly, I have to admit that I don't know what teaching assistants do other than assist teachers in this classroom. I don't know all what they do, but clearly they have a function, and they are an important function within the education system, and so therefore they are a part, if you like, part of an education package which requires schools to be provided with the tools that are necessary to give children the broadest possible education and give them the necessary assistance that they may need.
Edward, there are plenty of people here who I'm sure will tell you in a minute. Daniel Kapczynski, teaching assistants. Do you appreciate their worth and want to support them?
Yes, very much so, of course, support them and the vital work that they do. But you also mentioned mental health issues, and this is a very important point. Theresa May has stated that the funding will be increased by £1.2 billion by 2020 in real terms. This is
that countrywide though?
Countrywide, yes.
Yeah, what will that mean for
services.
Well-
We're working parts of the day.
Well, Shropshire will benefit from that as well, like any other part of the United Kingdom. But one of the pledges that Mrs May has made is that funding for mental health issues will be increased in real terms by £1.2 billion between now and 2020. And she's made that commitment very, very strong.
Will they reopen the youth service? Will they fund the youth service? Because that's where lots of young people
I've answered
went
the
to.
question.
Sorry.
Okay, Emma.
TAs, I learnt today that the number of secondary school children in England being taught in classes with 36 or more pupils has trebled in the last 5 years, and it's now almost 18,000. I was shocked to find that out, and I imagine it can only be, the number can only be increasing with the cuts we were hearing about earlier. So I think in that situation, TAs are becoming more and more crucial, and I know that TAs do a wide variety of work. They support individual children, they take groups for small group work. They, they're kind of completely part of the class in everything that they do. So yes, absolutely, we support TAs and recognise the work they do.
Laura.
Thank you. Daniel, you say you support the work of teaching assistants, and yet you have condoned the funding cuts that has made so many of them redundant and has squeezed... They have a role in every classroom, but they have a particularly important role in dealing with SEND students, who they can provide one-to-one care to support those students to remain in mainstream education.
Preempt Daniel's reply on how do you pay for everything?
Labour have got a clearly costed
Black hole.
manifesto. And again, like I said, the
They've got a
establishment of a
black
national
hole the
education
size of a
service
galaxy.
set minimum
Black hole.
standards and teaching assistants will be able to continue with their valuable role. Without teaching assistants, like I said, SEND students will lose their one-to-one care. Pastoral care is lost. It's known that girls in particular, around the age of 14, their self-esteem plummets. That leaves them vulnerable to online bullying, sexual exploitation. I mean, I don't know how many of you saw that really disturbing dramatisation about the Rochdale grooming scandal, which made for really uncomfortable watching, but it was obvious where the interventions could have been made in order to prevent that from happening. You know, you've got kids that aren't able to talk to people, and yet, I mean, my son adores his teaching assistant, and she is brilliant in the classroom, and she's a real asset to his learning, an asset to the whole class's learning, and without them, you know, learning will suffer. Kids will not get the individual attention that they need, and again, they have a role in supporting students with mental health problems and identifying students that need to be, you know, alerting social services. While everything is stripped, while class sizes are increasing and staff are decreasing, the opportunities for identifying children who need extra support and then giving them that extra support are squeezed and squeezed and squeezed, and that's something that Labour is committed to reversing.
Hannah Fraser.
I was surprised and delighted when my eldest child first started school, and I realised he was in a room with 38 children in, but with 2 qualified teachers and 3 teaching assistants. It was brilliant. They got such good support, and the teachers were well supported by their TA staff. I think the teachers are the unsung heroes of our country, but I think the teaching assistants are even, you know, less heard about, and you guys really are the unsung heroes of our schools. You provide such incredible support to the teaching staff and to the children. As Laura said, the targeted work you do is highly valuable. The work with children with SEN is also highly valuable, and it really, really makes me angry that as we speak, teaching assistant posts are not being filled. I've heard of a school where teaching assistants are sort of, you know, the ones with lots of experience are deciding that they'll take voluntary redundancy to leave the younger ones who perhaps need the money more, you know, they can have the job. And the schools are losing such valuable experience, and it's tragic. And Daniel, it makes me really angry. This Conservative government has got it completely wrong. Just coming back on the cows, mental health issues for young people desperately do need more money. They really do. But I think if you gave more money to the system here in Shropshire at the moment, they wouldn't know what to do with it. They're in such disarray. The management is chronic. You know, there's a bigger problem. We're told that it is being addressed, that there's going to be new commissioning and a new service, and we're sort of watching with bated breath as to whether or not that's going to work. But it needs constant scrutiny, and it needs all of us to be saying to the authorities, you need to do better and just keep up that volume, because it has to get better. It's just desperate at the moment.
Laura, one sentence to add?
I just want to add as well, teaching assistants are appallingly badly paid as well. As are teachers, as are employees across the public sector. Below inflation pay rises, which is essentially a pay cut that we have had for the last 10 years, has been absolutely shocking. And it's no wonder that vacancies remain unfilled, because it's you're better paid to work elsewhere, even though it's not such a rewarding job.
Okay, we thank you very much for coming. Everybody here is readily contactable. If you didn't get